inviting us here today. I know we got some technical difficulties, but I hope everybody can hear us at least a little bit. So what I'm talking about today is Canada and the UK and a comparison of the R&D tax incentive programs. And the reason I wrote this paper was because I thought it was really interesting to see how two countries that have a lot in common. You know, we were quite surprised when we were doing work in the UK how similar the business cultures are, and certainly the government structure and the tax structure are a lot of similarities, and you would expect that given our history. But what was interesting was looking at the programs in each country and how they were treated from a policy point of view. In other words, what was the government intending to do, and how was the government going to go about to see if this program was effective? And what came out of that was really kind of interesting. And in terms of both programs, I mean, the program in the UK started around 2000. It was kind of implemented between 2000 and 2002. And they basically, you know, took our definition of what SR&ED was. And if you read their guidelines, it almost reads identical. If you read their CURD guide, what they call their CURD guidelines, and a few other guidelines, very, very similar. Of course, all countries, programs are based on the Frascati manual, which has these criteria set out of technological advancement, uncertainty, etc. But more so, the UK, you know, in terms of its definition, was very, very similar. But what was interesting was really how the government went about this. And so when I was speaking with the government maybe about 10 years ago, what they said to me was kind of interesting. They said, look, this program is an incentive program. And first and foremost, we want it to work. And we're going to set metrics to see if it is working. And if at some point in time it doesn't work, then we're not going to have the program anymore. Secondly, we want to make this program friendly to business. And if it gets too much admin, we're going to pull the program again, because we know businesses can't take that. So those two things were really kind of interesting comments that were made. And what really kind of came out in it was, you know, some stark contrast between Canada and the UK. And I would say in terms of accountability, one of the things I really like about the UK is that roughly about 2 months after every year, they publish their stats. So basically what they say is that, okay, for every pound that we invested in the R&D tax credit program, there was an additional R&D spend of 2.5 pounds. Now, people can be cynical and say, oh yeah, how did they get that number and all that sort of stuff. But they publish in detail their methods of going about that. And they invite comments from people to say, yes, you know, can we get a better metric or that sort of thing. But what I like about it is that it's focused on R&D spend by businesses. You know, often in Canada, you know, they say, well, you rank 22 in the innovation ranking out of 34 countries in the OECD. Well, innovation also includes commercialization and sales, and that's not what the SR&ED program is targeting. There's no incentive in the SR&ED program for commercialization. But in Canada, we don't even keep those stats the way the UK keeps the stats. And in fact, you know, CRA doesn't publish those things. And so how do we have a program where we're spending billions of dollars at it and we don't account for it? You know, so when the SR&ED program comes under attack, no one can stand up and say whether it's good or bad. In the UK, it's quite easy. And when they hit those numbers, the incentive goes up. You know, if they say, oh yeah, the increase in the R&D spending, you know, they say let's put more money into it. So really interesting from a policy point of view. And then again, you know, how it's treated in terms of HMRC is the equivalent to CRA in the UK. And when they administer the program, again, it's kind of interesting. First and foremost, that the SR&ED practitioners may be surprised as they don't have technical people in the UK that come out to evaluate the projects on a site review. The inspectors, which would be like the FRs in Canada, review that come out, and they ask the technical questions. And what they've done there is to basically train these people to say, look, what we want to do, this is an incentive program. Ultimately, it's about developing new products and improving processes. So keep that in mind. That's what we want. And so these inspectors that go out, they're given certain areas. So there could be an inspector for software for the health industry's sake. And after a year or two, that inspector has probably seen 60 files and read 60 project descriptions, and they get some training as to what the technology is doing in that area, but they're taking a common sense approach to it. And when they come out to a company to do a site review, they're looking for what they call the competent professional in the company. So that's the person that can articulate what was being done. And if that person has the experience and credibility and academic background, and they can answer the questions, and it all sounds reasonable, then the claim goes through. HMRC, like CRA, will focus on the numbers, which I think is important because they want to make sure no abuse is happening there. So, in other words, did they spend the money? Were the costs allocated reasonably? These sort of things, right? And so these reviews by HMRC tend to be over in a half a day at most, and they don't really drag on. Also, the percentage of reviews is statistically a lot lower than the reviews that are currently being carried out in Canada. The other thing I would say is that if someone has a problem on a review, you can get a second review real quick. And it just goes to another office and probably happens within 2 or 3 weeks. And you can get a second review and an independent inspector from another office will review the claim. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The other thing too, just also looking at innovation, HMRC, most of everything is online, and you can communicate with HMRC via email. You find with CRA, it's we're just sort of getting online, and we have to fax everything to CRA. They won't take emails and things like that. Of course, in terms of the rates, Canada is more generous for SMEs, no question about it. We're over 40% depending upon what province you're in, and for large companies, 15%. In the UK, generally for SMEs, it's between around 25 to 32%, and an SME is basically defined as a company with less than 500 staff. And the large companies get 8%, but it's refundable. So there's a refundability feature for large companies. I talked about the service standards a little bit. We know that if you file on time, you're going to get your claim processed generally in 4 months, that sort of thing. But if you file a claim in the UK, I think 95% of the time you get your check within 30 days. So again, how can the UK process things that quickly, where they've got the same load and everything else that Canada has? And again, it's getting money into the hands of businesses when they need it on a timely basis. So it's quite interesting to take a look at the differences between these two countries. And again, I think it comes ultimately back to the policy of the government and what they want to achieve. So what I like about the UK is they've got accountability. At least they have a metric that they're adhering to. Everyone in Parliament looks at that metric and they decide whether to put more money into it. They make it business friendly. They don't over administer it. And I think they've kept the rates. While you may say the rates aren't that great, but they're comfortable with the rates. Everything's kind of in line, and it's got a high degree of acceptance by the business community. You don't hear a lot of complaints about the R&D program in the UK. So it's something that I think the Canadian government should really revisit in terms of how a program like this can impact policy, or how policy should govern a program like this and make it very effective. Anyways, that's just a quick overview of comparison between the two. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.